Hi everyone. Tonight we step into a cold, damp dawn, where the mist clings to fields that should be golden but lie sodden and gray. You shuffle out of a thin, threadbare blanket into boots caked with yesterday's mud, the air sharp with the scent of wet earth, and something else, something like rot, quiet and insistent. Somewhere close, a rooster coughs, not crowing, but sounding more like it's trying to remember what morning sounds like. It's a day that feels like it's already lost before it's even begun. You pause to listen, and there it is, a distant drip, drip, drip of relentless rain falling from low-hanging clouds, soaking the land that was supposed to feed you. The fields stretch out vast and empty, a tapestry of soggy dirt and flattened stalks where the grain should have stood tall. It's the year 1315, and this isn't just a wet spring, this is the start of a disaster, the likes of which you've never known. They call it the Great Famine, but for you it's less a historical event and more a slow, gnawing ache that starts right here, right now. Before you get too comfortable in your straw-stuffed shoes, a small warning: you wouldn't last a day as a peasant in these times, no matter how tough you think you are. The cold seeps into your bones. Hunger clutches your stomach like a vice, and even the simplest tasks feel like climbing a mountain. But stick with me through this, and I promise you'll never look at a loaf of bread or a muddy field the same way again. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. It's always fascinating to see how far and wide we travel, even if only in stories. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for a gentle background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step outside the rough wooden hut, and the chill wraps around you like a thin, wet cloak. Your breath curls in the air, mingling with the damp smell of moss and decaying leaves that carpet the ground. The sky is a dull slate, promising no sun today, or any day soon. You can almost hear the fields whispering their surrender, as the cold, persistent rain softens the soil, turning it to a muddy mess where crops should be reaching toward the light. Instead, what you see are broken stalks, twisted and waterlogged, heavy with rot. The village is waking slowly. The wooden carts stand idle, their wheels sunk slightly into the softened earth. Women gather at the well, their faces drawn and pale, exchanging quiet words you can't quite catch over the patter of rain. Children, still wrapped in threadbare cloaks, huddle near the fire pits, their eyes wide with a mix of curiosity and hunger. The usual morning chorus of birds is strangely muted, as if even they sense the heaviness pressing down on this place. You're hungry already, though you barely remember when you last ate a proper meal. The thought of bread, once common, now feels like a luxury whispered about in fevered dreams. Your hands move automatically, pulling on a thin coat that's seen better days, and you start the slow walk toward the fields, knowing the day ahead will be hard, if not impossible. This morning is different. It carries a quiet dread. The earth is tired, soaked beyond healing, and your body knows it. Each step sinks slightly, pulling at your boots. Somewhere beneath the muddy surface, tiny seeds that should have grown into food are drowning instead, killed by the cold and wet that have refused to relent for weeks. You hear a faint cough from the corner of the village, and glance over to see an old man clutching his chest, his breath ragged in the damp air. Illness always follows hunger, a cruel second act to this unfolding tragedy. But for now, the focus is on survival, on finding any scrap that can keep the gnawing emptiness at bay. Outside your hut, the wind shifts, carrying the faint scent of decay, mixed with wet straw and smoke from distant chimneys. The world feels slippery and fragile, like walking on ice in shoes too thin to keep you safe. Your stomach rumbles again, sharper this time. You think of the fields, the empty granaries, the slow disappearance of every small comfort, and somewhere deep inside, a tiny voice asks if this morning, like so many others now, will be your last. The rain hasn't stopped. In fact, it's as if the sky has cracked open and decided to pour out its sorrows endlessly. You stand at the edge of the field boots, sinking slightly into the soggy earth, the mud sucking at your soles, like the land itself is reluctant to hold you. The furrows where the grain should have sprouted are swollen with water, a sorry, churned mess of dirt and rotting leaves. Instead of fresh green shoots, you see only dark patches where the seeds have drowned a silent testament to nature's cruelty. This relentless wetness is not just bad luck, it's the core of the catastrophe unfolding before you. Historians today call it a climate anomaly, but for you it's a daily nightmare. The Great Famine, they say, was triggered by what we might now call a little ice age, beginning around this time bringing unusual cold and incessant rains that destroyed crops across much of Europe. It's not a gentle drought or a poor harvest. It's a total collapse of the growing season, leaving entire communities hungry, desperate and afraid. You watch as a handful of peasants attempt to tend the fields, their hands red and raw from the cold, wet earth. They shovel and dig, but the water only pools back, refusing to be tamed. The soil, once fertile and full of promise, has become a watery grave for the seeds. You feel the weight of their exhaustion, the slow despair settling like fog. No matter how hard they try, the land won't cooperate. The rain has turned everything to muck, and the very air smells of decay. Not just the damp earth, but the remnants of last year's failed crops, sodden and rotting where they lay. Rotten potatoes and cabbages, left uneaten, the stench curling up your nostrils and settling in your chest. It's a smell you're growing to hate, one that haunts your every step and gnaws at your appetite, even when there's nothing to eat. You remember a time before this when the fields were alive with buzzing insects and vibrant green. When the sun warmed your face and the wind carried the scent of fresh hay. But that seems like a story from another life told by someone else. Now the sky is a perpetual gray dome, heavy with rain and sadness. You shift your weight cold, seeping through your threadbare clothes, and glance toward the village. Smoke rises lazily from chimneys, but it's thin, and weak wood is scarce and fire is precious. You think about the bread ovens, the last ones still burning. Bread, the simple loaf that used to fill bellies and warm hearts, has become a symbol of survival, something rare and precious. Even the public markets have turned quiet and grim. Traders come less frequently wary of the famine's reach. Prices have skyrocketed, and many can't afford what little is available. The bread you once took for granted now costs what would have bought a small flock of chickens in better times. You've heard of peasants pawning tools, clothes, even their children's future just to get a crust. Desperation is a heavy coin. You sigh and pull your cloak tighter. Your fingers stiff with cold brush away a stray lock of hair from your face. Around you the fields stretch flat and endless, a patchwork of soggy earth and drowned seeds. Somewhere beneath the muck, you hope some stubborn kernel might still survive, but you know better. The wet has killed more than just this year's hopes, it's killing dreams. There's a side story you overheard in the village square not long ago. a rumor about how some farmers had noticed strange changes in the weather for years before this catastrophe. Some said it was the wrath of God, others blamed witches or bad spirits. It's fascinating in a dark way how people try to explain the inexplicable. Today, scholars debate what role climate played versus social factors in worsening the famine. Some argue it was the final straw breaking an already fragile system. Others insist it created entirely new hardships no one was ready for. You shake your head, trying to clear the weight of these thoughts. There's no time for philosophy when your belly is empty and your hands are numb. You have work to do even if the land refuses to yield. The peasants nearby call out to each other, voices rough and tired. They talk about seeds and soil, about last year's harvest and this year's ruin, but their words feel hollow, rehearsed in the endless cycle of disappointment. You can almost hear the collective heartbeat of the village slowing, as hope drains away like the muddy water slipping through your fingers. A dog trots past skinny and soaked tail low between its legs. Even the animals seem to sense the shift, the slow, creeping death hanging in the air. Livestock are suffering, 2 chickens with missing feathers, cattle too weak to stand. You know that soon, if it hasn't happened already, many will be sold off or butchered just to prevent starvation. Protein, once a rare treat, is vanishing fast. You glance toward the horizon where the clouds press low, heavy with more rain. There's no relief coming. Just more wet, more cold, and more days like this. The wet earth, the ruined crops, the hollowed-out bellies, they are all connected, a slow unraveling of a way of life that depended on the land's mercy. The peasants work on, though, with stubborn, heartbreaking determination. You think of the centuries of tradition of knowledge passed down from your ancestors about planting and harvest. But centuries of wisdom can't hold back a storm like this. The land, once generous, has turned harsh and unyielding. You're reminded of a strange detail you once read in a manuscript during the famine. Some desperate villagers resorted to eating things long considered taboo, like tree bark, boiled roots, and even leather softened in broth. The line between survival and madness blurred, and what was once food became fantasy. You shiver, pulling your cloak tighter around you. The cold dampness clings to your skin, a constant reminder that nature isn't your friend right now. It's a battle you're losing day by day, seed by seed. Despite the hardship, there's a rhythm to this misery. The endless wet, the rotting crops, the hungry bellies, a rhythm that marks your days now. You wonder how many others in villages like yours, scattered across the continent, are feeling the same cold hearing, the same rain, tasting the same disappointment. You sigh again and start back toward the village boots, heavy with mud. There's work to be done, even if the land refuses to reward it. Hunger waits for no one, and neither does the rain. You trudge through the village streets, the soaked earth squelching beneath your feet, carrying with you the heavy scent of desperation and decay. Around you, the wooden huts lean on tired beams, their thatched roofs darkened and dripping from weeks of relentless rain. Smoke curls in thin, uncertain trails from chimneys mingling with the damp air and the unmistakable tang of rot. It's a smell that has settled over the village like a shroud, part earth, part spoiled food, and part something more haunting, the quiet scent of fading life. You catch a whiff of it again near the communal refuse pile where discarded vegetables and fruit lie half buried in mud, festering in slow motion. Potatoes, carrots, and turnips, once meant to nourish, now glisten with a slick sheen of rot, soft and broken down by the ceaseless moisture. Flies buzz lazily over the mound, their dull drone mixing with the low murmurs of villagers who gather nearby, speaking in hushed tones, faces drawn and pale. The stench is almost unbearable, yet it has become the backdrop of your existence so familiar that it fades into the shadows of your awareness until you stop to breathe it in. It sticks to your clothes, clings to your hair, and settles deep in your chest, a constant reminder that the bounty of the earth has turned against you. You make your way past the well, where women draw water with trembling hands, their faces etched with worry. The water is cold and murky, reflecting the gray sky above, and the well's stone rim is slick with moss and algae. You remember the stories about wells being contaminated during times like this, how disease can spread quickly through a single drop. It's not just hunger you have to fear, it's sickness that rides the same bitter wind. Children play quietly near a broken cart, their laughter thin and brittle like fragile glass on the verge of shattering. Their clothes hang loose on their shrinking frames, and their eyes, wide and bright with youthful innocence, flicker with the quiet shadow of hunger. Some clutch half-eaten roots or stale breadcrumbs, and you wonder how long they've gone without a full meal. You pause by a small fire pit where a woman stirs a pot of watery stew, the ingredients scarce and unidentifiable. The aroma is faint, a mere ghost of nourishment, but the warmth draws villagers close, seeking comfort in shared struggle. You take a moment to sit on a nearby log, the dampness seeping through your threadbare garments, and let the heaviness of the scene settle over you. It's in these moments that the reality of the great famine sinks in, not just the empty fields and rotting crops, but the slow unraveling of community and hope. The stench of decay is more than just physical. It's the smell of lives fraying at the edges of families stretched thin and spirits beginning to break. You overhear a conversation between two elderly men, their voices low but urgent. They speak of last year's harvest, of how the rain came too soon and stayed too long drowning the young shoots before they could grow. One mutters about the blight, a mysterious plague that attacked the roots and leaves, turning crops black and brittle. The other nods, solemnly adding that no one could have predicted such a cruel twist of fate. Historical debate swirls around this very point even centuries later, whether it was a series of unfortunate weather events or a deeper ecological shift that plunged Europe into famine. Some scholars argue that soil exhaustion and overfarming made the land vulnerable, while others point to volcanic eruptions and shifting jet streams as culprits. For you, the cause matters less than the effect, the smell of rot, the empty stomachs, the dwindling hope. As you rise to continue your walk, a sharp cry cuts through the gray morning, a child calling for its mother, voice thin and urgent. You turn to see a small figure clutching at a woman's skirt's eyes, wide with fear and confusion. The woman looks tired beyond words, her hands trembling as she soothes the child, whispering promises she barely believes herself. This scene repeats itself throughout the village, families caught between love and desperation, trying to shield each other from the worst while feeling it closing in from all sides. You realize that the stench of decay is not just from spoiled food, but from the slow decay of life itself, the invisible rot of starvation gnawing at flesh and bone. You think back to the old healer's hut you passed earlier, its door barely hanging on its hinges. Inside, the air was thick with herbs and incense, a desperate attempt to mask the scent of sickness that pervades the village. The healer's eyes, once bright and confident, now flicker with doubt as she tends to the weak and dying. Her remedies, roots, barks, and potions seem powerless against the creeping shadow of malnutrition and disease. The village is caught in a vicious cycle. Hunger weakens bodies, and weakened bodies fall prey to illness. Dysentery, typhus, and pneumonia stalk the streets, invisible killers that pick off the vulnerable. You hear whispers that some have begun to succumb overnight, leaving families too stunned or too afraid to bury them properly. You press on the dampness seeping into your bones, and the smell of rot clinging stubbornly to your senses. Each breath tastes of despair, yet you push forward, knowing that the day demands it. The village depends on every pair of hands, even when those hands tremble and bodies falter. A curious detail crosses your mind, a forgotten practice from times of hardship, when villagers would scatter lime or ashes over rotting refuse to slow decay and mask the smell. But these measures are weak against weeks of rain and relentless rot. The smell triumphs, a physical reminder that the famine is more than just hunger. It is an all-consuming presence. You stop by a small garden patch once tended with care, now overgrown with weeds and muddy puddles. A few stubborn herbs struggle to survive, their leaves pale and wilting. You wonder if anyone will harvest them for medicine or flavor, or if they will be left to drown like so much else. The village priest passes by, his robes damp and threadbare, carrying a book that seems heavier than usual. His face is grave, and he offers no words of comfort, only a weary nod. Even faith feels strained here, stretched thin by suffering and loss. You shake your head, trying to shake off the heaviness that settles over you like a wet blanket. The smell of desperation and decay lingers in the air, a constant companion in these grim times. It is a smell that will haunt your dreams and shadow your days, a bitter reminder of a world turned upside down. As you make your way back toward your hut, the rain begins to ease, but the dampness remains soaking through clothes and spirits alike. You know that this smell will stay with you, a mark of the great famine's grip on your life and your land. The day stretches on, and with it the grim realization settles deeper bread once the humble staple of your daily meals has become as rare and precious as gold. You walk toward the village's small bakehouse, a stone building with a blackened chimney that still manages to puff out a faint wisp of smoke. It's one of the few places where the smell of warmth briefly replaces the damp rot that clings everywhere else. But even here, the atmosphere is tense, the usual jovial chatter replaced by hushed voices and worried glances. Inside, the air is thick with the scent of smoke and stale flour, but the ovens work at half capacity, and the supply of grain is pitifully small. You watch as the village baker shapes tiny loaves, their crusts thin and pale, lacking the golden hue of better days. These loaves will barely fill a child's belly, let alone an adult's. The grain is ground finer than usual, almost to dust, just to stretch what little there is. Every crumb is fought over. You recall that bread has always been more than just food. It's been a symbol of life, of community. Yet now it feels like a symbol of everything slipping away. The phrase breaking bread sounds like a cruel joke when the loaf is so small it might break before it even reaches your hands. Across the village, the market square offers little relief. Merchants bring in small quantities of barley and rye, but the prices have soared beyond what most peasants can afford. Barter has replaced coin for many, and even then, trades are fraught with suspicion. You overhear whispers of people pawning tools, clothing, and even family heirlooms in desperate attempts to buy food. The social fabric is fraying under the strain of hunger and fear. You remember a quirky detail from a dusty old manuscript during times like this. Some peasants resorted to grinding acorns or even dried leaves to bake into their bread. It might sound like a medieval version of a diet fad gone wrong, but for them it was a grim necessity. The taste was bitter, the texture harsh, but it filled the stomach if only briefly. You watch a mother cradle her child, her arms trembling as she breaks a small piece of bread in two. Her eyes are tired but fierce, determined to give her child what she can't have herself. It's a scene repeated countless times across villages like yours, a testament to human resilience amid despair. The scarcity of bread also sparks a slow, simmering anger among the villagers. You hear murmurs of resentment not just toward the weather or the land, but toward those who seem untouched by the famine's bite. Nobles and clergy, who still enjoy ample food, become targets of quiet accusations and bitterness. This growing tension threatens to fracture an already fragile community. Historians debate how much the famine contributed to social unrest in the years that followed. Some argue that these early hardships sowed seeds of rebellion and change, while others see them as moments that exposed existing inequalities rather than created new ones. For you living through it, the lines between survival and revolt blur under the shadow of hunger. The bakery's oven groans, and a faint warmth brushes your face as a batch of loaves is pulled from the fire. You reach out instinctively, the smell tempting, but the knowledge bitter. One loaf might feed a family for a day, or barely one person. Sharing becomes an act of both charity and sacrifice, and no one knows how long it can last. Your stomach growls louder than you'd like to admit, a sharp reminder of your own emptiness. You think about the fields outside the village, soaked and barren, the rotting crops that never made it to harvest. The wet has stolen more than just food. It's stolen your security and your peace of mind. You wander back toward the center of the village, passing families gathered around their meager fires, clutching what little food they have. The air hums with quiet desperation and fading hope. You wonder how many more mornings will begin like this, with cold, wet clothes, empty stomachs, and the gnawing fear that there might be nothing left tomorrow. A child runs past, clutching a hard piece of bread, the crust so tough it could chip a tooth. You smile faintly, trying to hold on to some warmth amid the chill. This famine has changed everything: the fields, the food, the people. But it has not yet extinguished the flicker of life within. You think of the public debate among scholars about the role of diet in medieval health. Some suggest that the sudden reliance on poorer, less nutritious foods during famines weakened immune systems, making people more vulnerable to disease. It makes sense. You feel it in your own body, the fatigue that won't go away, the cold that no fire seems to chase off. As evening approaches, you head back to your hut, the faint glow of candlelight flickering behind shuttered windows. You know tomorrow will be much like today, damp, hungry, and uncertain. But for now, you allow yourself a moment to breathe, to feel the fragile warmth of a tiny loaf of bread in your hands, and to remember that even in the darkest times, small comforts matter. You wake to the low, mournful calls of animals stirred by the damp dawn, their sounds carrying the weary weight of a village struggling beneath the great famine. Nearby, a cow shifts uneasily, its ribs visible beneath a thinning coat, eyes dull with exhaustion. Chickens wander listlessly, feathers patchy and matted, clucking softly, as if lamenting their own fate. These creatures, once a steady source of warmth, labor, and nourishment, have become fragile echoes of their former selves, victims of the same relentless hunger and hardship that grips the people. Livestock have always been vital to peasant life, providing more than just meat. They till the fields, fertilize the soil, and offer dairy products that sustain families through the lean months. But now the wet and cold have taken their toll. Mud-caked hooves struggle in the waterlogged pastures, and the once abundant barns now echo with silence where the animals have been sold. Off, stolen, or succumbed to illness. You remember a conversation with a neighbor last week, a man whose face is lined with worry and fatigue. He spoke of the heartbreaking decision to slaughter his last cow early, choosing immediate sustenance over future labor. It was a choice no farmer wants to make, but survival forced his hand. The loss of animals isn't just about food, it's the loss of hope and security. In many villages, this pattern repeats. Chickens, pigs, and goats are sold or consumed long before their natural lifespan, leaving families vulnerable. The great oxen used to pull plows are now few and far between, making the task of farming even harder. Without these animals, the land waits fallow and the cycle of hunger deepens. There's a curious detail you once read in some places. Peasants resorted to eating animal hides softened in boiling water, and even ground bones to extract marrow. These desperate measures highlight the brutal reality of starvation, where every resource is exhausted, and dignity becomes a luxury few can afford. As you walk past the empty stables, you catch a whiff of damp straw and the faint musk of animal sweat now tinged with neglect. The ground beneath is churned mud, torn up by restless hooves long gone. The silence is eerie, a stark contrast to the usual morning cacophony of bleats, clucks, and snorts. Nearby, a group of children watches as a farmer sells his last remaining goats to a traveling merchant. The animals, thin and skittish, are loaded onto a creaky cart bound for uncertain fates. The children's eyes follow the cart wide with sadness and hunger. They know that each departure marks a shrinking lifeline. This loss of livestock also affects nutrition. Meat and dairy, once vital sources of protein and fat, become scarce. Peasants turn to roots, leaves, and whatever small game they can catch, but these can't replace the rich calories and nutrients once provided by animals. Weakness spreads through the village like a slow poison. Historical accounts mention that this decline in livestock contributed to longer-term consequences. With fewer animals to work the fields, agricultural productivity plummeted, trapping communities in a cycle of poor harvests and starvation. The famine didn't just affect this year, it altered the landscape of rural life for decades. You pause by a pond, watching ducks paddle lazily through the muddy water. Even they seem less vibrant than usual, feathers slick and dull. You wonder if these small creatures will survive the coming months, or if they too will fall victim to the relentless hardship. The village healer warns that malnutrition weakens resistance to disease, making both people and animals vulnerable. She's seen too many animals die, suddenly their bodies wasted away despite care. The boundary between human and animal suffering blurs under the harsh reality of famine. There's a side story you recall about how some desperate peasants attempted to keep animals alive by feeding them scraps, weeds, and even tree bark. These measures were makeshift and often futile, but they show the stubborn will to cling to any hope. As the day warms slightly, you hear a rooster crow weakly from a distant yard, a faint reminder of normalcy. But even the animals seem to know something is wrong. Their movements are slower, their eyes duller. It's as if the famine has drained the life from everything it touches. You think about how the loss of animals affects more than just food. It strips away layers of community life and work. Without oxen, plowing becomes near impossible. Without chickens, there are fewer eggs to eat or trade. Without cows, no milk to soothe a child's hunger. Each loss reverberates through the fragile economy of survival. The livestock are silent victims in this crisis, their suffering often overlooked beneath the human tragedy. Yet their decline is intertwined with yours, a shared story of resilience and loss. As you return to your hut, the sun dips behind thick clouds, casting long shadows over the mud and broken fences. The evening chill settles in, and you wonder how many more nights your animals will endure this harsh winter. In your heart, you know that the fate of the animals is a mirror of your own, a fragile thread holding on against the storm. The hunger is no longer just a gnawing emptiness in your stomach. It's a persistent shadow that drags your whole body down. As days turn into weeks, your strength fades, and with it, your ability to fend off the many illnesses creeping silently through the village. You feel it first as a chill that no fire can shake, a fatigue that pins you to the damp ground. It's the creeping arrival of disease, riding the coattails of starvation like a silent, merciless thief. The connection between famine and disease isn't new, but it's particularly brutal here and now. When your body lacks nutrition, your immune system falters, and even minor infections become deadly threats. Dysentery spreads through the village like wildfire carried by contaminated water and weakened bodies. You hear the hollow coughs of neighbors, the urgent calls for help, and the whispered prayers for relief. Walking past the communal latrine, you notice the telltale signs, muddy footprints, discarded rags, and a smell so foul it clings to your clothes. Hygiene is a luxury few can afford, and the rain only makes the mess worse, washing filth into the wells and streams that provide the village's drinking water. It's a vicious cycle. Contaminated water fuels disease, and disease deepens the famine's grasp. The healer, once confident in her remedies, now moves with weary resignation. Her herbs and poultices, which once brought relief, seem powerless against the tide of sickness. She warns of typhus and pneumonia diseases that thrive in cold, wet conditions and crowded, unsanitary quarters. You've seen how quickly the weak and old succumb, their bodies failing, despite the healer's best efforts. You overhear a quiet debate among villagers about the causes of their suffering. Some blame the wrath of God, others the wickedness of neighbors or the failings of their lords. Theological explanations mingle with superstition, a desperate attempt to make sense of a senseless crisis. Historians today still debate how much famine directly caused the spread of disease versus poor sanitation and social conditions. But for you, the result is the same, a slow march toward death. You remember a sidebar detail in some villages. Plague-like symptoms appeared during the famine years, though it's unclear if these were early signs of the Black Death or other illnesses exacerbated by starvation. The overlap of disease and famine creates a deadly fog that smothers hope. The village's crowded homes offer little refuge. Families huddle together for warmth, but close quarters also mean that coughs and fevers pass quickly from one person to the next. The sick are often left to suffer in silence for care, and comfort are in short supply. You think about the children you passed earlier, their thin faces and sunken eyes. They are the most vulnerable, their bodies too small to fight off the constant assault of hunger and illness. Mothers wrap them in fraying cloth, whispering lullabies that sound more like prayers for survival. A soft drizzle begins again, mixing with the tears of those who watch their loved ones fade. The air feels thick with sorrow and fear, a heavy cloak that settles over the village like the endless rain. Despite the despair, you see flickers of determination. Neighbors share what little they have. The healer tends to the sick with trembling hands, and prayers rise from the church fragile threads of hope woven into the gray sky. You feel your own body grow weaker, muscles aching, energy draining like water through cracked fingers. Every breath is a labor, every step a struggle. The disease is not just around you. It is within you, gnawing at your insides, waiting for the moment your defenses fall. The Great Famine is no longer just a story told by the rain and rotting fields. It is a living, breathing force, stalking the village through the hunger and sickness, claiming lives one by one. You press your hand to your forehead, feeling the faint warmth of a fever rising. The world tilts slightly, and you know that tomorrow, like today, will be a battle for every breath. You find yourself at the doorstep of the healer's humble hut, the air thick with the scent of dried herbs, faint smoke, and something more elusive hope barely clinging to life. The healer, an older woman whose face is lined with years of care and worry, moves slowly, her hands steady, but her eyes tired. She greets you with a nod that carries both welcome and warning. The sickness in the village grows, and her remedies seem less effective by the day. Inside, bundles of dried flowers and roots hang from the ceiling, swaying gently in the draft. The walls are lined with jars filled with strange concoctions, powders and tinctures, each one a testament to centuries of accumulated knowledge and belief. You watch as she mixes a bitter brew, her fingers nimble despite the weight pressing down on her spirit. The healer's role is a complex one, straddling the worlds of science, superstition, and faith. Her treatments combine practical herbs, known for their medicinal properties, with rituals and prayers meant to coax the spirits or saints into mercy. But in the grip of famine and disease, her powers feel stretched thin. You hear her murmuring softly, chanting a prayer or incantation, a plea for strength in the face of relentless hardship. She hands you a small cup of the bitter tonic, a mix of nettle elderflower, and a pinch of crushed mint. The taste is sharp and earthy, lingering on your tongue like a reminder that healing is a bitter, uncertain path. Around her, the sick lie on rough pallets, their bodies gaunt and eyes glazed. The healer tends to each with care, cleaning wounds, soothing fevers, and offering words of comfort. Yet you notice the flicker of doubt in her gaze, a silent acknowledgement that, despite her efforts, many will not recover. You recall that herbal medicine in medieval times was a blend of observation and tradition. Plants like willow bark rich in salicylic acid, the basis for modern aspirin, were used to ease pain and fever, but treatments for serious diseases were limited. The healer's tools were as much about hope and ritual as they were about cures. She shares with you a sidebar detail. During times of famine, some healers expanded their practices to include nutrition advice, urging villagers to consume whatever plants or roots they could find. Unfortunately, many of these were barely edible and sometimes toxic in large amounts, but when starving, any food was welcome. The healer also battles superstition, as villagers grow fearful and desperate. Some accuse her of witchcraft when her remedies fail, while others cling to her every word, seeing her as a last beacon of hope. The tension is palpable, a reminder that in crisis faith can both heal and harm. You watch a mother hand her feverish child over to the healer. The woman's hands tremble, and her eyes plead silently. The healer wraps the child in a soft cloth, humming a gentle lullaby blending comfort with care. You realize that sometimes healing is as much about presence and compassion as about herbs and potions. The public debate among historians about medieval medicine reflects this complexity. Some argue that healers like her were crucial in maintaining community health, while others point out the limits and dangers of their knowledge. What remains clear is that in famine times, they carried the heavy burden of hope against overwhelming odds. You step outside the hut, the scent of herbs lingering on your skin, a faint promise of relief in a world steeped in pain. The rain has paused, and the village feels momentarily still caught between despair and the fragile hope that the healer embodies. You take a deep breath, tasting the cool air, and wonder if this small sanctuary of care can withstand the storm ahead. The sun hangs low behind thick, swollen clouds, casting a gray light over the sodden fields, where you must work despite the weight dragging at your limbs. Your clothes cling damp and heavy, the mud seeping through worn soles as you shuffle toward the earth that refuses to yield. The relentless cold has turned the land to a soggy mess, and every step feels like wading through a sea of disappointment. You grip your tools, a rough wooden hoe and a cracked spade with hands raw from cold and exhaustion. The fields, once the promise of life and plenty, now look like battlefields of rot and defeat. Stalks of grain lie flattened, tangled in muddy water. You know the land is too wet to plant, too cold to grow, and the seeds left are few and far between. Despite your aching body and the gnawing hunger twisting your gut, the work must continue. The rhythms of farm life, so long ingrained, press you forward. The land demands tending, even if it no longer promises reward. You dig, you turn, you hope. But the soil feels unyielding, unkind, a stubborn adversary, rather than a willing partner. Nearby, a group of peasants struggles to clear a flooded ditch water, spilling over the edges and washing away precious topsoil. Their voices are low voices, tight with frustration and fatigue. You hear snippets of complaints about the endless rain, the ruined crops, the mercilessness of fate. But beneath the complaints lies a fierce determination, a stubborn refusal to surrender completely. You recall a quirky detail from a village tale during desperate times like these. Some peasants would bury stones or iron objects in their fields, hoping to wake the earth and coax it into fertility. It's a superstition born from helplessness, a small act of rebellion against forces beyond their control. The work is brutal, more so because your own strength is fading. Hunger makes your muscles ache, saps your focus, and dulls your spirit. The soil resists your efforts cold and heavy, and the tools feel heavier with each passing hour. Yet you press on, driven by the faint hope that anything might grow. The physical toll is matched by a creeping despair. Every failed attempt to coax life from the mud deepens the sense of futility. You watch your fellow laborers' faces pale and drawn eyes fixed on the horizon as if willing the skies to clear. The collective weariness settles like a fog over the group, but no one stops moving. Historians debate whether the famine permanently altered medieval agricultural practices or merely highlighted vulnerabilities already present. Some suggest that communities began diversifying crops or improving drainage afterward. Others argue that the immediate years following the famine were marked by continued struggle and decline. For you, caught in the moment, such long-term thinking feels distant. The sun begins to set, but the sky remains a dull slate. The promise of twilight barely warming the chill. Your hands tremble slightly as you lower your tools. The ground is littered with bits of broken stalks mud and the fading hope of harvest. You pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders and look toward the village where smoke curls from chimneys and faint lights glow in windows. Inside those walls, families gather what little they can, preparing meager meals and tending to the sick. Outside, the fields remain soaked and unyielding, a cruel reminder of nature's indifference. The air is heavy with the scent of wet earth and fading green, a smell that has become a constant companion. You breathe it in, letting it fill your lungs, a bittersweet mixture of life and decay. As night falls, you realize that the fight to work the land is more than physical. It's a battle of will against despair. Tomorrow will bring the same struggle, the same cold, wet earth, and the same fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, the soil will relent. You take a final look at the fields before turning toward home. Feet dragging, but heart stubbornly beating. The land may be cruel, but it is all you have. The village buzzes with whispered conversations, eyes darting with suspicion and fear. Hunger, once a shared burden, now fuels a quiet shift. A subtle but growing tension threading through neighborly smiles and village gatherings. You sense it in the sidelong glances, in the tightened grips on scarce possessions, and the cautious way people lock their doors at night. The famine's grip is not just on your stomachs. It is seeping into the very fabric of trust and community. Food, or the lack thereof, has a way of changing relationships. Where once there was shared bread and warm hearths, now there's suspicion over stolen vegetables, quiet accusations of hoarding, and a reluctance to offer help lest you become a target yourself. You hear rumors that some villagers have taken to sneaking into others' fields under cover of darkness, desperate to find whatever might have survived the flood and rot. You recall a peculiar anecdote from a dusty chronicle, a tale of two neighbors who once shared everything but became bitter enemies over a single loaf of bread during a harsh winter. It seems small things become monumental when survival is at stake. This shift is not just about individual greed or weakness. It reflects the unbearable pressure the famine places on social bonds. The village elders gather in hushed meetings, trying to maintain order, but their words often fall on deaf ears, or are drowned out by the murmurs of unrest. Historians debate how much famine-induced scarcity eroded communal ties in medieval societies. Some argue that shared suffering strengthened solidarity in some regions, while in others it unraveled the delicate web of social cooperation. In your village, the signs point toward fracture. You walk past a group of villagers arguing over the distribution of what little grain remains. Voices rise, faces flush with frustration and hunger-fueled anger. A man accuses another of secretly hiding supplies. A woman cries over the injustice of watching her children starve while others eat. The air crackles with tension, a powder keg waiting for a spark. Despite the fear and suspicion, moments of kindness still flicker through the gloom. A young woman shares a handful of dried herbs with an elderly neighbor. A father gives his last egg to a starving child. These small acts of generosity feel like rebellion against the harshness of reality. Fragile threads of humanity clinging to hope. You realize that famine doesn't just steal food. It steals peace of mind, replaces smiles with guarded expressions, and turns friends into wary strangers. The village becomes a landscape of silent battles, fought not with weapons, but with glances and whispers. The church bell tolls a somber reminder of lives lost and days slipping away. Inside the small chapel, the priest speaks of charity and patience, urging villagers to hold fast to faith and each other. But outside, the weight of hunger presses harder than any sermon. You think of the debates scholars have about famine's social impact, whether it merely exposed existing inequalities or actively fueled tensions that led to uprisings in later decades. For you living through the cracks appearing in your once close community, these questions feel immediate and personal. As night falls, you lock your door and sit by a dim candle heart, heavy with the knowledge that the people you've depended on may no longer be reliable allies in this fight. The famine has changed everything, not just the land or the food, but the bonds that held your life together. Outside, the rain begins again, tapping a steady rhythm against the roof, a cold, relentless reminder that the struggle is far from over. The church stands quietly at the heart of the village, its stone walls soaked from weeks of rain, its wooden doors swollen and creaking with age. You step inside, seeking more than just shelter from the cold dampness. It's the familiar scent of burning candles and old wood, the soft murmurs of prayers, and the flickering shadows cast by flickering flames that offer a brief respite from the endless gray outside. The local priest, a man weathered by years of sermons and sorrow, offers you a nod, his eyes heavy with the burden of guiding a flock through unrelenting hardship. His voice when he speaks is soft but firm, weaving comfort and caution into his words. He reminds the congregation that this trial is part of God's plan, a test of faith and endurance, urging patience and charity among the desperate. Yet you can't help but notice the tension beneath his calm exterior. The church's coffers are thin, the once plentiful tithes dwindled by famine. The priest struggles to offer tangible help, limited to providing spiritual solace and the occasional alms to the most desperate. His sermons echo in the empty pews, seeking to heal hearts, while the villagers' bellies remain empty. You recall reading that during medieval famines the church played a complicated role, both a source of comfort and sometimes frustration. Some clergy distributed food and cared for the sick, while others were criticized for hoarding resources or focusing too much on spiritual salvation over physical needs. Outside the chapel, the rain softens to a mist, and the village moves quietly, shadows slipping between half-lit windows. You sense the villagers' mixed feelings about their spiritual leader reverence, mixed with frustration, faith intertwined with fear. A curious detail crosses your mind. In some regions, the church organized communal fasts and prayers to seek divine intervention, hoping to lift the curse of famine. These rituals offered hope, but also reinforced the idea that the disaster was a punishment for sin, adding another layer of anxiety to an already dire situation. You think about how the famine tested not just bodies, but beliefs, shaking the foundations of faith for many. Yet the church remained a central pillar, its rituals and presence anchoring the community, even as the world seemed to crumble. The village children, now thinner and quieter, sometimes gather outside the churchyard, watching the flicker of candlelight through stained glass windows. For them, the church is both a refuge and a reminder of fragility, a place where hope and despair live side by side. As you leave the chapel, the priest's words linger: patience, charity, endurance. Words that feel both comforting and distant, like echoes from another world. The village moves on, carried forward by faith and fear, by rituals old as time and struggles new as each dawn. You step back into the damp air, the faint scent of incense mixing with the earth's wet breath. The Church's presence is a reminder that even amid decay and hunger, humans seek meaning, solace, and connection. Outside, the rain falls again, steady and unyielding, a reminder that some storms last longer than others. The children move quietly through the village, their small feet slipping on muddy paths, faces pale and eyes wide with a mix of innocence and fear. Their laughter, once bright and carefree, has dimmed to a fragile whisper carried by the cold, damp air. You watch as a group of them huddle near the remnants of a broken cart, sharing a few stale crumbs passed around with desperate generosity. Children in famine times are the most vulnerable, their growing bodies starved of the nutrients they need to thrive. You see their ribs pressed tight against thin skin, their cheeks hollow, and their movements slow and tired. Some clutch worn dolls or ragged blankets, seeking comfort in the smallest of things amid the vast emptiness surrounding them. You overhear a mother whispering to another, her voice trembling, as she describes her youngest child's fever, a sign of illness that could mean death in these harsh conditions. The village healer does what she can, but even her remedies falter when bodies are too weak to fight. The loss of children to famine and disease is a grim reality, a shadow that hangs over every family. Birth rates drop as malnutrition affects fertility, and infant mortality rises sharply. For those who survive, the scars of starvation can linger for a lifetime, affecting growth, health, and even future generations. A historical note you recall mentions that some medieval communities tried to shield their children by prioritizing them in food distribution, but this was not always possible. The harsh mathematics of survival often meant choices no parent should have to make. You watch a small boy, no older than 6, sit quietly on a doorstep, his eyes reflecting a sorrow too deep for his years. He clutches a small, cracked wooden toy, a rare treasure in these times. Nearby, a girl peeks shyly from behind a door, her hair tangled and face smudged with dirt. Despite the bleakness, moments of childhood innocence persist. Children play simple games with sticks and stones, chase one another in fleeting bursts of energy, and sing soft songs learned before the famine cast its shadow. These small acts of normalcy offer a brief reprieve from hunger and fear. You remember a curious detail from a village chronicle during times of famine. Some children were sent away to relatives or monasteries in better-fed areas, though this was a heartbreaking separation for families already stretched thin. Others were forced into work or begging at a younger age, their childhood stolen by necessity. The village school, once a place of learning and laughter, now stands quiet and empty, its wooden door hanging ajar. The few literate among you struggle to keep hope alive through stories and prayers, but even these are shadowed by the grim reality outside. As dusk falls, you see children gathered around fires wrapped in thin blankets, their eyes heavy with exhaustion. Mothers sing lullabies that seem more like prayers, voices soft and cracked with fatigue. The future feels uncertain, fragile as the flickering flames. You think about how famine's toll on children shapes the long arc of history. Generations weakened by hunger-faced challenges that ripple through time. Lower life expectancy, reduced productivity, and altered social structures. The Great Famine is not just a moment. It's a scar etched into the lives of those who endure. Despite the hardship, you see resilience. Children clutch hands, share smiles, and dream in quiet moments. It's a reminder that even in the darkest times, life finds a way to flicker and persist. You step away slowly, heart heavy, but tinged with a fragile hope that these small souls will somehow carry the village forward, beyond the shadow of famine. The thought of leaving the only home you've ever known gnaws at your heart. Yet the hunger pressing against your ribs makes the idea of staying unbearable. Families around you whisper about abandoning the village, about venturing into unknown lands in search of food work or a fresh start. Migration, once a rare and dangerous choice, now seems like the only flicker of hope amidst the despair. You see neighbors packing the barest of belongings into carts or onto backs, children clinging tightly to mother's eyes wide with uncertainty. The path ahead is treacherous, muddy tracks, swollen rivers, and the ever-present threat of illness and starvation. But the promise of a better life somewhere else, however faint, calls louder than the fear of the journey. Historically, famines often triggered waves of migration reshaping communities and even nations. Some peasants moved to towns hoping for charity or work. Others wandered to neighboring regions less affected by the crisis. These movements disrupted traditional social orders and fueled anxieties among landowners and rulers about restless, desperate populations. You overhear a family debating their options, weighing the dangers of travel against the certainty of death if they stay. The father speaks grimly about the risks, but acknowledges that starving in place is no future at all. The mother, eyes wet but resolute, clutches their youngest child close, whispering promises of safety she's not sure she can keep. The village elders warn against leaving, citing dangers on the road and the possibility of bandits or harsh winters. Yet desperation often outweighs caution. Stories filter back of travelers found frozen or lost, but also of others who reached distant places and found enough to eat, enough to live. You think about the public debate among historians. Did famine-induced migration sow seeds for social change, spreading new ideas and skills? Or did it simply scatter suffering and strain already fragile systems? The truth, as always, is tangled and complex. Your own heart aches with the thought of leaving familiar fields, friends, and the memory of better days. But the belly's hunger is a fierce command drowning out all other ties. You watch as carts creak under meager loads, families set off down muddy paths, their figures swallowed by mist and rain. The road is a test of endurance. Miles of uncertain terrain, cold nights under thin blankets, and the constant shadow of hunger and illness. You wonder who will make it, and who will turn back broken and defeated. The journey is a gamble, but for many it's the last card to play. You recall a poignant detail: in some cases, entire villages emptied as famine spread, leaving behind silent homes and overgrown fields. These ghost villages stand as stark reminders of the crisis's reach and the desperate choices people faced. The weight of departure presses down, mingling grief, fear, and a fragile hope. You pause at the village edge, looking back once more before stepping forward, the future uncertain, but your resolve steady. You walk along the muddy road leading out of your village, the chill in the air biting through your threadbare cloak. Families pack what little they can carry onto carts or on their backs, faces etched with exhaustion and worry. The sky is a dull gray, the persistent drizzle blurring the landscape into a watercolor of sorrow and determination. This exodus is a quiet one, marked not by fanfare or hope, but by the grim necessity to seek survival elsewhere. The countryside stretches out before you, fields flattened and soaked, forests dark and silent under the heavy clouds. Each step forward is weighed down by uncertainty and fear. The road is treacherous, slick with mud, swollen with puddles, and lined with the skeletal remains of once vibrant life. Your feet sink with every step, the earth reluctant to let go. You think about the risks ahead, harsh weather wild animals, and the threat of bandits preying on desperate travelers. Stories circulate about those who set out before you, some never to be seen again, others arriving at distant towns weakened but alive. The journey is as much a test of endurance as of hope. Migration during the Great Famine wasn't just an individual choice, but a community survival strategy. Entire families and sometimes groups of villages would uproot themselves, moving toward cities or areas less affected by the famine. This movement altered the social fabric, spreading culture's ideas and sometimes conflict. You overhear whispers of distant cities where food might still be found, where charity or work might offer a lifeline. Yet these places are crowded and wary of newcomers, and rumors of hostility and rejection abound. The journey to find safety is fraught with as much danger as the famine itself. The path is lined with abandoned homes and fields overtaken by weeds, silent testimonies to those who left behind everything. You pass a collapsed fence, a forgotten ox yoke lying in the mud, and a solitary shoe abandoned in haste. Each artifact tells a story of loss and desperation. You recall from your readings that such migrations during famine often led to social tensions in destination areas as newcomers competed for scarce resources. Sometimes they faced suspicion or outright hostility, adding another layer of hardship to an already perilous journey. As the rain intensifies, you pull your cloak tighter and glance back toward the fading outline of your village. It feels like leaving a part of yourself behind a place forever changed by the shadow of hunger. The road ahead is long, uncertain, and cold. But in this moment, it is the only path that promises a chance at survival. The lords and ladies in their stone castles look down on the famine-stricken village from their lofty perches, shielded from the rain and the mud by thick walls and roaring hearths. You've heard the stories, how the nobility feasted and slept warm, while peasants clawed for scraps outside the gates. Their lives seem untouched by the endless gray skies and rotting crops that define your days. Their banquets are lavish affairs, their tables groaning with meats, bread, and wine a world apart from your sparse meals and muddy boots. It's a bitter reality. The famine's cruelty doesn't spread evenly. The upper classes, protected by privilege and resources, remain insulated, their hardships reduced to occasional inconveniences rather than life-threatening crises. You feel the weight of that inequality pressing down as palpable as the rain soaking your cloak. You overhear villagers whispering about the lord's indifference or, worse, their obliviousness. Some say nobles view the famine as a distant problem, a temporary blip on the radar of their comfortable lives. Others accuse them of hoarding food, stockpiling grain while letting the peasants starve. Whether true or exaggerated, these rumors fuel resentment and deepen the divide. Yet the nobility's role isn't so simple. Many lords rely on peasant labor for their wealth and status, and a starving workforce threatens their own power and prosperity. Some provide charity grain money or protection, but these acts are often sporadic and insufficient, more about maintaining order than genuine compassion. Historians debate how the famine affected feudal relationships. Did it weaken the bonds between lord and peasant, sowing seeds of unrest? Or did it reinforce the hierarchy, with both sides clinging to tradition amid crisis? For you, the answer is clear in the cold nights and empty stomachs. The system feels brittle, strained to its breaking point. You imagine the castle kitchens bustling with servants preparing rich stews, and fresh bread fires roaring and ovens glowing. Meanwhile, just beyond the gates, your village lies silent and hungry. The contrast is sharp, a cruel reminder of disparity. A peculiar detail crosses your mind, a record of nobles hosting lavish feasts, even during times of famine, perhaps as displays of power and defiance. These events, often well documented by chroniclers, are stark counterpoints to the peasants suffering fueling tensions beneath the surface. You think about how this disconnect may have influenced later social upheavals, as starving peasants questioned the fairness of a system that allowed such disparity. The famine, while a natural disaster, exposed and exacerbated human inequalities. As dusk falls, you picture the lords retreating behind their walls, unaware or uncaring of the struggles just beyond. Their lives continue in warmth and abundance, while yours is shaped by cold hunger and uncertainty. You pull your cloak tighter, the chill of inequality settling deep within. The famine is not just a force of nature. It is a mirror reflecting the divisions that run through your world. The rain that has never truly stopped continues to fall, washing over the village and beyond, carrying the sorrow and desperation across the land. The Great Famine is no longer just a local calamity. Its reach extends far into distant cities, trade routes, and courts. You sense it in the whispering winds that carry news and rumors in the travelers' tales of empty markets and desperate crowds. The crisis is a ripple spreading outward, touching places and people you will never see yet, whose fate is now entwined with your own. The roads that once bustled with merchants and traders are quieter, the carts fewer and slower. Goods that used to flow freely, grains, salt cloth, are scarcer, their prices climbing beyond reach. The city's hubs of commerce and power are not immune. Their streets teem with hungry faces and restless crowds, all drawn by the hope of food or work. But the hunger that gnaws in your village is matched by an equal, sometimes fiercer desperation in stone and cobblestone places. You overhear merchants discussing the impact on trade, how grain shortages have stalled shipments, disrupted markets, and forced rulers to intervene with price controls or grain requisitions. The famine threatens not just bodies, but economies and governments. You recall that historians often note how such crises reveal the fragile interconnectedness of medieval Europe. A failed harvest in one region can starve a cities hundreds of miles away, and political decisions in royal courts ripple down to affect your daily struggle. The Great Famine is a shared ordeal, binding peasants, nobles, merchants, and kings in a common web of hardship. News spreads of bread riots in some cities where starving crowds clash with guards. Authorities fear unrest, prompting increased patrols and harsh punishments. The tension is palpable, a powder keg waiting for a spark. The famine also interrupts vital trade routes. Salt, essential for preserving food, becomes scarce and expensive. Without salt, food spoils faster, adding urgency and desperation to every meal. The scarcity of basic goods amplifies the crisis, pushing communities further toward collapse. You think about the distant lands beyond your village. The bustling ports, the wealthy manors, the farmlands barely touched by this endless rain. They feel like stories from another world. Yet their fate is bound to yours by the fragile threads of supply and demand. The rain finally eases, but the land remains sodden and exhausted. You watch as traders pack what little they have left, preparing for uncertain journeys ahead. The famine's reach is vast and relentless. As night falls, you find a moment of quiet amidst the chaos. The village, though battered and weary, still holds on. The shared struggle connects you to countless others, all weathering the storm in their own ways. You breathe in the cold air, tasting the mingled scents of wet earth and distant fires. The Great Famine is not just your story. It is a chapter in a larger saga of survival, resilience, and change. The days stretch on in a slow, unending procession, each one folding seamlessly into the next, under the relentless weight of hunger and hardship. You wake before dawn, the chill seeping through your threadbare blankets, and shuffle outside to a world cloaked in gray mist and damp silence. The village stirs, but the usual noises, the laughter of children, the clatter of carts, the calls of merchants are muted, subdued by the heavy fog of famine's shadow. Your body feels like it's made of lead, muscles weak and joints stiff from exhaustion and lack of nourishment. Each movement is a conscious effort, a battle against the fatigue that clings like a second skin. The simple act of standing feels monumental, yet the work never ends. The fields demand tending. The fires need stoking, and the hope of finding food remains your constant, if fragile, companion. You walk past neighbors whose faces mirror your own weariness, eyes sunken and voices low. Some speak in quiet desperation. Others retreat into silence, wrapped in layers of sorrow and fear. The village, once a lively community, feels like a collection of shadows, each person struggling under their own burdens. The cold rain has given way to a biting wind that cuts through your clothes, making your fingers numb and your breath visible in the air. You pull your cloak tighter, seeking comfort in the small barrier against the elements. The earth beneath your boots is frozen in patches, a cruel reminder that winter is approaching, bringing with it new challenges. You think about the slow erosion of hope that has settled over the village. At first, the famine was a crisis to be endured with grim determination. Now it is a persistent ache, a dull weight pressing on your spirit. Dreams of plentiful harvests and warm hearths seem like distant memories replaced by a day-to-day existence marked by survival. Yet, amidst the despair, you notice small acts of resilience. A neighbor shares a scrap of bread. A child offers a wildflower picked from a patch of stubborn grass. These gestures, simple and fleeting, shine like tiny stars in the dark night of famine. Historians speak of this slow erosion as a defining feature of the Great Famine, the gradual wearing down of bodies, communities, and hopes. It was not just the physical hunger, but the emotional toll, the constant uncertainty, and the creeping numbness that made survival so brutal. You pause at the village, well watching the thin stream of water trickle into a bucket. It's cold and clear, but even this small resource feels precious, a lifeline in a world drained of abundance. The well has become a gathering place, a spot where news, fears, and hopes are exchanged in whispered conversations. The wind picks up, carrying with it the faint scent of smoke from distant fires. Perhaps a neighboring village still burns bright, or maybe it's a signal hope flickering somewhere beyond the rain-soaked fields. You clutch your cloak tighter, letting the possibility of warmth and light fill the cold spaces inside. As night falls, the village settles into uneasy rest. The hunger remains a persistent shadow, but the shared experience binds you together in ways both painful and profound. You lie down on your straw-filled mattress, letting exhaustion pull you into a restless sleep. In the quiet darkness, you dream of better days, of golden fields, warm bread, and the laughter of children echoing through the village square. For a moment, hope feels tangible, a gentle whisper against the roaring silence of famine. Winter arrives with a cold so biting it seeps deep into your bones, making even the simplest tasks feel like battles waged against an unyielding enemy. The dampness that had saturated the land now freezes into ice, turning the village paths slick and treacherous. The once muddy fields are locked beneath a brittle crust, the crops beneath the frozen soil buried dormant but unreachable. Your breath forms quick, ghostly clouds in the frigid air as you step outside, muscles stiff and movements slow. The cold sharpens the hunger that has been your constant companion, transforming the gnawing ache into a fierce, urgent craving. Fires and hearths throughout the village crackle weakly against the night, their warmth fighting a losing battle against the chill that presses in from all sides. Fuel is scarce. Wood piles have dwindled, and the forest's offerings are limited after months of harsh weather. You wrap your cloak tighter, the fabric doing little to stem the cold that creeps into your skin. Winter brings its own dangers beyond the freezing temperatures. Illness, already rampant, worsens. Pneumonia spreads silently through cramped homes. Fevers flare, and coughs linger like cruel reminders of bodies weakened by months of starvation. The healer's hut feels more like a sanctuary for the dying than a place of cure. You witness the toll in hollow cheeks and sunken eyes, in whispered prayers and tearful farewells. You remember a strange but grim detail you once read about this period. Villagers burning old clothes and straw to keep fires going, despite the smoke choking the small rooms. The sacrifices made to survive seem endless. Hunger weakens resistance, and the cold steals lives in the shadows. The village becomes quieter. Fewer voices rise in the frozen air, and the streets empty earlier each night. The community, once vibrant with shared labor and laughter, now clings to the barest strands of existence. Some families break apart, sending children to relatives, or begging on distant roads, while others huddle together seeking warmth in numbers. Historians debate the impact of winter on famine mortality. Some argue the cold months were the deadliest, compounding the starvation with disease and exposure. Others note that winter also brought a temporary halt to the land's demands, giving survivors a brief reprieve from labor. Either way, the season tests endurance to its limits. Despite the hardships, you find moments of fragile beauty. A clear, star-filled sky that seems impossibly vast, the crisp crunch of frost underfoot, the quiet companionship of a shared blanket around a flickering fire. These small mercies remind you of the world beyond suffering. You stare into the firelight, feeling the heat kiss your face, imagining spring's promise hidden beneath the frozen ground. The weight of winter presses down, but so does a stubborn hope that life will return, that the earth will soften, and the hunger will fade. As night deepens, you draw your cloak around yourself, letting the warmth hold you tight. The cold may be fierce, but so is your will to endure. Survival becomes a daily negotiation with hunger, cold, and despair, forcing you and your fellow villagers to make grim and sometimes unthinkable choices. Every morsel of food is precious, every scrap of warmth a luxury. You find yourself scavenging for whatever might stave off the gnawing emptiness, wild herbs, tree bark softened in boiling water, even the roots of plants once left untouched. The taste is bitter, unfamiliar, but hunger dulls the senses, and the body demands fuel. Some villagers sell tools, clothing, or household items, trading possessions once valued for their utility or sentimentality for small amounts of grain or dried fish. These exchanges feel like the slow selling off of one's very identity, each loss deepening the sense of desperation. You see a mother part with her worn cloak to feed her children, her eyes heavy with sorrow and resolve. The choices extend beyond food. Some risked venturing into nearby forests or marshes, hunting small game or fishing in icy streams. These excursions were perilous, with the land treacherous and the animals wary. Yet the faint hope of catching a rabbit or gathering a handful of berries propelled people forward, driven by hunger's unrelenting grip. There are whispered stories of more desperate measures, villagers consuming leather softened in broth, grinding bones for marrow, or boiling acorns and leaves into bitter, barely edible stews. Such measures were last resort's evidence of the famine's cruel extremity. You shudder at the thought, but understand the logic survival trumps all. You hear of families sending members away to beg in towns or monasteries, hoping for alms or shelter. The shame of begging weighs heavily, yet pride dissolves in the face of starvation. Children, too young to understand the danger, wander in search of food, their small hands grasping for scraps. The village well becomes a gathering point, not just for water, but for sharing information about distant markets, charity distributions, or the arrival of traveling merchants. Even so, the scarcity of goods means hope often outpaces reality. You recall debates among historians about the range of survival strategies during famines. Some highlight the resourcefulness and communal sharing that prolonged life. Others note how desperation led to social breakdown and sometimes criminal acts. The line between survival and desperation blurs in these times. You watch as your neighbors make their choices, selling heirlooms, rationing food, taking risks to gather wild plants. The weight of these decisions is heavy, the cost often invisible until it is too late. Amid this, small acts of kindness endure a shared meal. A warm blanket offered, a prayer whispered for the weary. These moments shine in the darkness fragile lights that remind you of your humanity. The cold seeps in deeper each day, and hunger's claws grow sharper. Yet you cling to the hope that these sacrifices will keep you and those you love alive through the darkest nights. As you lay down beneath your thin covering, the echo of distant voices and the faint rustle of leaves lull you into a restless sleep. Tomorrow, like today, will demand all you have to give. The Great Famine did not exist in isolation. Historians have long debated its connection to the devastating Black Death that swept across Europe just a few decades later. As you live through the slow torment of hunger and despair, you can't help but wonder if the weakened bodies and shattered communities around you will be ready to face the plague's merciless advance. Malnutrition during the famine has left you and your neighbors vulnerable, your immune systems compromised by months of starvation. The body's defenses are down, making it easier for diseases to take hold and spread. The village, already reeling from hunger and hardship, stands on the precipice of another disaster that could decimate what little remains. Some scholars argue that the Great Famine served as a grim prelude, softening the population and setting the stage for the catastrophic impact of the Black Death. Others contend that social and environmental factors played more significant roles. Yet the link between famine-induced weakness and disease susceptibility is undeniable. You notice how the village's communal spaces, once places of gathering and support, have become sites of fear and isolation. The sick are often shunned or left alone, their pain magnified by loneliness. The social fabric, already frayed by scarcity, is stretched to breaking. You recall the stories of past famines and plagues, how communities struggled to understand the invisible forces attacking their bodies and lives. The healer's potions and prayers now feel fragile in the face of unseen enemies. The church bells toll more frequently, marking funerals and the passage of those lost to illness. You wonder how many more nights the village can endure the combined weight of starvation and disease. Yet, even in this darkness, moments of courage and resilience emerge. Neighbors care for the ill, sharing what little comfort they can. The community, though battered, fights to hold on. You think of the children now thin and quiet, their futures uncertain in a world shadowed by famine and plague. The old stories speak of cycles of hardship, death, and eventual renewal. You hold on to the hope that life will persist beyond these trials. As the cold wind sweeps through the village, carrying whispers of change, you prepare for what lies ahead. The great famine has scarred the land and its people, but it has not broken their spirit. At last, the rain begins to lessen, the heavy clouds parting just enough to let pale sunlight filter through. The earth remains soaked and heavy, but there's a subtle shift, a fragile promise that the relentless wetness is easing, that the season of despair may be drawing to a close. You stand at the edge of the village, looking out over the battered fields and silent homes, feeling the slow stir of something almost like hope. The famine's grip has left deep scars. Empty granaries, abandoned farms, and the faces of those lost to hunger and illness all speak of a long ordeal. Yet beneath the sorrow there is a quiet resilience, a stubborn determination to rebuild, to plant new seeds, and to dream of better days. You walk through the village one last time, noticing small signs of recovery. A few brave shoots of green pushing through the mud, the soft coo of a returning dove, a child's tentative smile. These fragments of life remind you that even after the darkest storms, nature and humanity find a way to heal. Families gather to share what little they have, breaking bread, thin and hard, but still bread. The village healer smiles faintly as her patients show signs of strength returning. The church bells ring softly, calling people together not just for prayer, but for community, for rebuilding the bonds strained by hardship. Historians debate the long-term impact of the Great Famine, how it reshaped agricultural practices, altered social structures, and changed the relationship between peasants and lords. For you, the lessons are etched in memory and soil alike, the fragility of life, the power of perseverance, and the deep interconnection between humans and the land. As the sun dips low, casting warm hues across the horizon, you feel a gentle peace settling over the village. The storm has passed, but its echoes will linger, a reminder of endurance and the cycles of struggle and renewal. You take a deep breath, the air cool and fresh, and whisper a silent thanks for this fragile dawn. The Great Famine will remain a chapter in your story, but it will not define your future. Good night.